Hi, Charles.
Hi, Michael.
Okay, actually, let's just wait for 5 minutes before it gets started. We have a young audience, seems like.
Yes, starting early.
Very early. Let's just wait for 2 minutes and then we can get it started.
Sure.
So, Michael, are you you are holding these with different companies, like these types of sessions?
Yeah. So we are actually also doing the drug development, but it's on small molecule. It's on ALS and Alzheimer's disease.
So only the companies that are presenting can attend this, or can other companies attend as well?
No, every company can attend actually. So if you want to attend to some other event, it's totally welcome. I mean, it's same address every time. I mean, same passcode. I mean, there you don't have the passcode; just one click.
And so, is there a schedule that you have posted somewhere? I mean, it might be interesting to hear other advisors.
Yeah, we have
as well.
we have a whole schedule. I think I sent to you. No, I think I sent to you.
I think you might have, yeah.
Yeah, we have a whole schedule to next year March, early March.
Okay.
Okay, we think we can get started. All right, good night, everybody. Welcome to QBay Accelerator Program for early stage startup on precision medicine. My name is Michael. I'm the leader of the program. Tonight is our second event. First of all, let's welcome Dan, our Director of Marketing and BD, to give a brief introduction of the program. Dan, you there?
Yeah, yes. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I'm right here. So good evening, everyone. So my name is Dan Zhang. I'm Director of Marketing and BD at QBay Center. So welcome, join us in the QBay Accelerator Program. And thank you, Charles, for being a speaker tonight. Yeah. So firstly, I'd like to give you an introduction of this program. So hold me for a second. Let me share my screen. Okay. So the QBay Startup Accelerator Program aims to help promising startups scale efficiently and effectively while increasing their technical know-how to compete in a global market. In August and September, we have selected a dozen of promising startups with cutting-edge technology or products in the precision medicine market. During the 4-month program, the selected startups will get all the resources needed for their development through QBay platform, including the free office space at QBay, mentor training, VC connections, pitch opportunities, and service credit from our partners. I guess some of you haven't got an idea of what QBay is. So, founded in September 2018, QBay Center is a global platform to connect and support innovation and entrepreneurship. With a mission of platform and investment and services, QBay Center is designed as an innovative business model which combines workspace, business exhibition, financial activity, technology cooperation, business services, and startup incubation. So in the picture, so here is a picture of QBay Silicon Valley campus. So it's sitting at the heart of San Jose. We have the neighbors like Intel, Cisco, and Samsung Silicon Valley. So the building just completed the renovation in 2018 with a pretty modern and spacious look inside. We hope to provide all the companies at QBay a vibrant and inspiring environment to grow their business. And besides Silicon Valley, we also set up several innovation centers in other countries already, including Israel, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Mexico. We are also launching our new sites in Canada and Europe in the near future. So every company in our platform has the access to our global resources. So QBay focuses on high-tech life science industries, including biomedicine, IVD, medical equipment, AI-based medical services, and mobile medical care. We hope that these bring together the brightest minds in the field of precision medicine and AI to foster learning, innovation, and future development. So for today's event, please feel free to ask questions in the chat section. My colleague Brian and I are happy to connect with you. So Brian, are you there? Hi, Brian.
Hi, yes, I'm here, Dan. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian. I'm the business development manager here at QBay. I got a little confession. I know I told a lot of you I'd reach out to you the first night. I haven't completed that list. I can see you laughing, Raj. I'm looking forward to talking to you. But my intention this week is to finish that list and see what your needs are and to make this experience more personal to all of you. I will leave my contact information in the chat section so that you can reach out to me and we can get connected, but I will complete that list this week. Any questions, any resources you may need, let's continue the chat. And go ahead and feel free to make your comments in the chat section.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Brian. So thank you everyone for your time joining us tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the Friday night with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Brian. For the introduction of QBay. Again, we're a very new organization and welcome to support us more. Okay, let's get the talk started. There is a little bit of change for tonight. Tania is not going to be presenting tonight and her talk will be switched to January next year. Tonight we have Charles Thier as our guest. He's CEO and president of Tricon Pharmaceuticals. Tricon was founded in 2004 and 10 years later, in 2015, Tricon successfully IPO'd on NASDAQ. Ivafolimac, Charles, correct me if I pronounce it wrong. It's the first subcutaneous checkpoint inhibitors on sarcoma, a PD-L1 drug. Different product including Tricon 102 on lung cancer, Tricon 253 on prostate cancer, and on different pipelines on solid tumors and so on. Charles has been with the company from the very beginning. He will talk about it later. Now, we actually stole him for a QBay talk right after his vacation. Charles, you literally saved my life. Thanks a lot. Okay, let's keep it short. Charles, you there? Oh, by the way, tonight's event is going to be live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, so people are also going to watch on there. Charles, you should have the full control now. Let me see if you have the full control. Yeah, I think so. Charles, you're on mute. You're still on mute. I mean, let me. Hello?
Okay, there we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Can people see that okay?
It's
Yes.
brilliant.
Yes.
Perfect.
Very clear. Okay, great. Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation to speak. And what I thought I'd do after speaking with Michael is just give a brief overview of the challenges of drug development from a very high level, talk a little bit about TRACON's path to becoming a public company, and then talk about our most recent value proposition, which represents an important partnership between us as a US pharmaceutical company and 2 Chinese pharmaceutical companies that have allowed us to move into a registrational trial for a subcutaneous checkpoint inhibitor in sarcoma. So I thought I'd first start off with how challenging drug development is, because unfortunately, most drugs fail. And if you look at the amount of capital that must be invested for one successful approval, it's immense. This is a study done by the Tufts Center for Drug Development. And what you can see is to approve just one drug, on average, it costs over $1 million in out-of-pocket costs, and in terms of capitalized costs, over $2 million. And you can see that the majority of that money is spent during clinical development. So this is an expensive enterprise, and that's why, for instance, partnerships are so common in our industry. So drug development is clearly costly. And one of the reasons it's so costly is because it's so risky. If you look across all therapeutic classes, the proportion of drugs that enter phase 1 that will then be approved is about 1 in 10. And what this shows is the conditional probabilities of moving through each of the 3 important phases of development. For example, you start with a new drug, you're in phase 1, there's about a 60% chance you'll move on to phase 2. Why you would drop off? Mainly because of safety effects. Once you're in phase 2, there's only a 35% chance you'll move to phase 3. Phase 2 is the highest risk portion of drug development, mainly because you're looking for a clear sign of efficacy. And that's the hardest thing to show in general in studies of new therapeutics. Once you're in phase 3, so that means phase 2 has been successful. Once you're in phase 3, the chance you'll move on to submit an application for approval, whether it's an NDA for a small molecule or a BLA for a biologic, is about 62%. And then once you actually submit an NDA, 9 times out of 10, or a BLA, 9 times out of 10, you will be approved. But these are all conditional probabilities. So when you multiply each of these 4 conditional probabilities, you get to the final overall proportion of success is about 12%. So this is a costly business and it's a risky business. And the reason it costs about $2 billion to approve a single drug is because in 9 out of 10 cases, money is spent on drugs that fail. So in other words, it doesn't cost $2 billion to approve a single drug. That's probably closer to 300 million. But because 9 of 10 drugs fail, when you take all the failed drug costs and add it to the 1 out of 10 that's successful, on average, it's $2 billion in capitalized costs to approve a single drug. The third issue is the time. So first is cost, second is risk, third is time. Unfortunately, it takes about 10 years on average for a drug to be approved. That's from IND filing through each of the 3 stages of clinical development, through the drug review process to be approved. And if you look at the single one component that is the longest duration, it is the phase 3 study. That may sometimes take half of the time. So 10 years to approve a typical drug, half that time may be spent in phase 3 testing. That's why in the United States, especially in oncology, which is my main focal area, if you can get approved based on phase 2 data through an accelerated approval mechanism where you use a surrogate endpoint as the basis for showing clinical benefit, that's such a huge advantage. You can potentially take a 10-year timeline, cut it down to 5 years. You'll still have to do what's called a post-approval commitment study, but you'll already be on the market making money while you're doing the phase 3 study to prove clinical benefit. So for example, in oncology, you may run a phase 2 trial in an unmet need area. show a response rate that's better than standard of care. That may be sufficient for approval. Once you're approved, you may then run the phase 3 randomized study to formally compare your drug, for instance, to the pre-existing standard of care. Importantly, risk is definitely associated with therapeutic area. I mentioned my main focus is solid tumors. That's oncology. Unfortunately, on the right side of the graph, you can see that with oncology trials, they're actually the most risky in terms of overall development. So instead of 1 in 10 drugs getting approved in interphase 1 in oncology, it's more like 1 in 20. You can see, for example, hematology is actually one of the least risky areas to study. 1 in 4 of drugs that enter phase 1 in hematology end up being approved. And you can see the differences across different therapeutic areas. So with that background, you know, we're in a very high risk, high cost, long timeline type business. And in terms of being able to succeed in this business, you know, I just put a couple things that I think are important to me and important to TRACON. And that is, there are probably 3 things that make your chance of success better. And one is, first, the most important thing in your company is the people. Your people are your most important asset. And you, for TRACON, for example, our team is mainly driven from Pfizer people. So our team was all working at Pfizer. We were involved in the development of a drug called Sutent that revolutionized the care of kidney cancer. And following that approval, we moved to a smaller company, TRACON, but we had the big pharma experience. We knew best practices, and we knew how to, if you will, do drug development the right way. Next, you want a team that's innovative. You know, you want a team that's willing to take the risk and embrace that risk, knowing that you de-risk as much as you can, but you can never get around the fact that this is a risky business. The third thing I would say is collegiality. You know, you're in this game for a while, so it's important to, if you will, to enjoy the journey. If you work with people you like, it makes it much more enjoyable. If you're working with people you don't like, it is incredibly painful, because there's more than enough pain outside your business. You don't want the pain inside your business. You know, next is products. In terms of products, you know, try to diversify as much as you can. It's hard because each time you diversify, you're talking about increased budget. But really try to be a one product company, because a one product company ends up becoming a one trial company, and most trials fail. And so that means your company will fail. So try to develop a business model or a diversified pipeline such that you de-risk an already risky business. One example is sometimes companies need to make the choice between first-in-class or best-in-class assets. First-in-class means it's a mechanism that's unproven. That's incredibly risky. If it works, though, it could be incredibly lucrative. A more conservative play would be a best-in-class asset, meaning the mechanism of action is proven, but you take that into an unmet need area where the drug hasn't been studied or approved. I'll show you an example of what we did for the subcutaneous PD-L1 to develop it in sarcoma to do that exact thing. We took the best-in-class product, took it into an unmet need indication that's much less risky, for example, than taking a first-in-class product with a mechanism of action that's completely unproven into that same indication. And finally, the third real critical item is backing. You know, this is a very cost-intensive industry. You need solid backing, hopefully backing that you can go back to. So you want investors that are not in it for a quick exit, that have sufficient capital to fund you potentially for multiple rounds of financing, because it's a time, cost, and risky business. So I'll give you a little bit of background on myself and TRACON. So my background, just in more detail, is I'm originally a molecular biologist in college at MIT. I then went to medical school at UC San Francisco. And then I formally trained in surgical oncology at the UCLA Medical Center. I was in practice for several years at UC Irvine, but I always had the biotech bug. I actually worked at biotech at Biogen even in my college years. And then I was drawn back to biotech while I was a full-time surgeon at UC Irvine. I joined IDEC, and I'll give you an example of one of the products we developed at IDEC called Rituxan. I then moved to the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, Pfizer, where we developed the drug Sutent, which really changed the standard of care in kidney cancer. I then joined a private company, Targogen, and though it took a while, we ended up developing a drug that was approved just last year in myelofibrosis. And then I've been at TRACON for well over 10 years, and we're about to start a pivotal study with envafolimab that I'll discuss in a second. So we started TRACON back in 2006 is when we really came together, even though it was formally incorporated in 2004. And I came into that job with key people I knew at Pfizer, so we had the nucleus of a team to start the company. We licensed assets from academic labs. That's how we started the company. So these were licensed assets. They were preclinical, and we took those preclinical assets, filed the INDs, completed all the IND-enabling studies, and then moved them through the clinical trial process. Interestingly, only one of those products is still left from the initial inception of the company. In fact, our most important and lead product failed in a big phase 3 trial about 2 years ago. And we had to restart, if you will, our pipeline by licensing a new asset, which is the envafolimab drug I'll talk about. Things I would emphasize is where you don't want to be cheap is don't be cheap with your intellectual property protection. You know, hire a really top firm that will protect your patent estate. That is your livelihood. That's what you'll license to other companies, or that's what other companies will try to infringe upon potentially if you don't have good patent protection. The other thing I'd emphasize is manufacturing. You really, if you can, and it's sometimes hard, but if you can find a manufacturer that can grow with you, that's the ideal situation. Sometimes people will take a really inexpensive way out to manufacture their drug, and they'll pay for it in terms of quality, but also pay for it in terms of not being able to advance the product as from a manufacturing perspective as the drug moves through the clinical trial process. In terms of what TRACON did, so we came together in 2006. We were funded initially by high net worth individuals. You may sometimes call these angel investors or seed funding. And we lived off angel or seed funding or high net worth individual funding, private equity sources, if you will, from 2006, 2008. And then if you recall, in 2008, the markets crashed. And if you were around in that time, you know how tough it was to be in biotech. And we had to live on just a small amount of capital, about $8 million for the next 2 years. But we persevered, we kept advancing our products. And then as the world thawed, so to speak, and the financial markets recovered, we raised a formal Series A, a venture capital round. It was led by a Japanese fund called JAFCO. And that was in 2011. That's a classic, standard, if you will, VC round and what many young companies will do. Later on in 2014, we executed our first formal partnership, which was nice validation of our platform and our lead asset. We did that with a Japanese company called Santen to develop our lead asset in AMD, or wet AMD rather, age-related macular degeneration and eye disease, while we focused on oncology. And shortly thereafter, that deal, we were able to raise a nice round of capital that was a crossover round. So a round intended to bridge until the time of our public offering. And we were able to attract a very nice blue chip investor and Enterprise Associates out of Silicon Valley. And following that crossover round, soon thereafter, in January of 2015, we went public on the NASDAQ, and we've been a public company for the past 5 years. But even as a public company, it's been an up and down road. I mentioned we went public based on data for our lead asset, which unfortunately had negative data in April 2019. And that was a clear setback, and we needed to replace that product with another near-term commercial asset. And that's what we were able to do with the envafolimab license that I'll talk about as we move through the presentation. So because this business is so risky, I thought I'd just talk about what the classic clinical development approach is to maximize value of a product. And I'll talk about Rituxan. Now, Rituxan was a drug that IDEC developed, took it through its pivotal studies, and then partnered with Genentech to make it a blockbuster drug. I mean, Rituxan, if you don't know it, is probably one of the most successful drugs of all time, with over $100 billion in revenue since its approval in 1997. But the way it was developed is instructive, and this is the way most small companies will develop their drug. First, focus on the high unmet need population. Just get your drug approved. And if you can, do it based on phase 2 data, utilizing the accelerated approval mechanism. That's exactly what IDEC and Genentech did. So they knew their drug was going to be active in any disease driven by abnormal B cells. It's a drug that attacks or binds the CD20 receptor on B cells and will deplete those B cells. The clear high unmet need indication was B-cell lymphoma. So the initial accelerated approval was in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a B-cell lymphoma. Following that approval, though, label expanded. When I say label expanded, what I mean is it was developed an additional indication to expand the use of the drug. And that's a classic paradigm. Get approved quickly through phase 2 data in the high unmet need indication where you're most active. But then the paradigm really is drug development doesn't really start until after the first approval. So once you're initially approved, then expand into any other indication that will benefit from your drug. And that's exactly what IDEC and Genentech did. In 2006 were important data showing the drug was active not just as a single agent in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but was active in the frontline setting when patients were initially diagnosed with a larger lymphoma subtype called diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. That same year was also approved in rheumatoid arthritis, which is another huge indication. So that's the example. Go to approval last line, get approved on response, then move into larger indications, go frontline, address more patients, and if you can, even go into a separate indication. Rituxan went from oncology into immune-related diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, and that's what allowed it to become the blockbuster drug that it was, and still is. Even this is really incredible. Improved in 1997. Last year, Rituxan sold $6.5 billion in sales. More than 20 years later, it's still a blockbuster drug. Another area to increase the odds of success is by, and this plays into the QBay thesis of employing biomarkers of precision medicine. You know, a lot of drugs could be successful if they were developed in the right populations. For instance, Herceptin. Herceptin is another one of the very successful drugs that binds the HER2 protein, which is expressed in some breast cancer patients. If Genentech had developed it in every breast cancer patient all at the same time and done large trials of all breast cancer patients, the drug probably would not have ever been approved because it doesn't work in the 80% of patients who are HER2 negative. Instead, they developed it in HER2 positive patients where it is very effective, and they developed a very successful drug. As this graphic shows, each of the steps leading from phase 1 to approval is improved if you define with a biomarker an enriched population that's more likely to respond to your drug. So as a general paradigm, this could be a genetic marker. It could be a mutation identified by next generation sequencing. It could be a certain tumor population. So for example, I'll talk about sarcoma. There's 70 types of sarcoma. Instead of focusing on all sarcoma, focus on certain subtypes that are most responsive to your drug. The other thing that I think is important as the world becomes more flat is leveraging global innovation. This is something we take very seriously at TRACON. You know, 20 years ago, every great drug was discovered in the US. That's no longer the case. I'll give you an example. Everyone has heard of the checkpoint inhibitors that are now dominating cancer care. Opdivo is made by BMS, and it's a very successful drug. Opdivo was licensed by BMS from Ono Pharmaceuticals, a Japanese company. Ono licensed the enabling technology of Kyoto University, a Japanese university. So you can see the world's getting flat, innovation's happening all over, and we want to make sure we exploit innovation so that everyone in the world benefits. And so we at TRACON, for example, employ a model where we look for innovative drugs outside of the US, where we can help those companies that have really no experience on how to develop the drugs in the US to move the drug quickly through clinical trials and then commercialize and then share the profits with our partner. We call this our CRO independent product development platform. And we engage in partnerships whereby we rapidly conduct trials ourselves, not through CROs. And by so doing, we take that risk. We pay for the trials because our partners have already paid for discovery and manufacturing. They've taken that risk. And by sharing the risk, sharing the cost, and sharing the profits on the back end, we create an aligned model of drug development that benefits our partner. The other benefit is that we can take that dossier that we expect to apply for approval in the US, give it to our partner, and then they can take it back to their home country, China, Europe, wherever, and use the same dossier to approve the drug in that region as well, probably with minimal additional clinical trials, maybe with no additional clinical trial data. So I'll give you an example of how this model's worked well with the drug called envafolimab that Michael mentioned. So envafolimab is exciting because it's what we call a best-in-class drug. It's a checkpoint inhibitor targeting the PD-L1 pathway. But what's different is it's a camel antibody, which means it's more stable and you can concentrate it to such a degree that you can give it subcutaneously. Every other checkpoint inhibitor approved in America is given intravenously. What that means for the patient is they have to go to an infusion center, wait for a chair, get an IV, get pre-meds, wait an hour to get the infusion. They might have an infusion reaction. They might need to be treated for that. Finally, after half a day in the infusion center, they go home. Envafolimab is given like a flu shot. 1.5 cc's in 30 seconds, you're done. So it's much more convenient for the patient. It was discovered by a company in China, AlphaMab Oncology, and they partnered with another Chinese company, 3D Medicines, to move the drug forward in clinical development. We worked with AlphaMab and 3D last year to discuss a partnership whereby we could take envafolimab into an indication where checkpoint inhibitors are effective, but no one has approved a drug there, and that is in certain sarcoma subtypes. So we did a partnership with AlphaMab and 3D Medicines in December of last year, and now less than a year later, we've opened a pivotal or registrational trial to approve that drug. In drug development, that's very quick movement. And the reason we were able to move so quickly is because we're focusing a best-in-class drug on an unmet need indication, which is something the FDA likes to see. We're focused on an orphan indication, initial market size about $300 million, but that's only the start. Just like with Rituxan, our plan is to approve it initially in the refractory setting, patients with a high unmet need with no real good medical options, but then after initial approval, broaden and, for instance, address other patients with sarcoma in the first-line setting when they're newly diagnosed. And we expect to have interim data next year, final data in 22, and to be marketing the drug in just over 2 years. I mentioned how easy envafolimab is to give. This is just a picture of why it is compared to giving a flu shot. Literally, it's sterilize the skin, inject the needle under the skin, 30 seconds later, it's done, and the patient can go home directly. Again, much easier than giving an IV checkpoint inhibitor infusion, which can take half a day or just to go through the rigmarole of going to the infusion center. I think envafolimab represents such a great example of how companies from China and the US can work together. So our partners in China, AlphaMab Oncology and 3D Medicines, have already established significant clinical data for this drug. They already were in 2 pivotal or registrational trials, one in what's called MSI high cancer, the other in biliary tract cancer. And they've done phase 1 studies in China, Japan, and the US. We could use all that data to immediately propose to the FDA a trial that's a registrational trial in sarcoma as is circled on this graphic. And our partners, we expect that our partners will apply actually for approval this year in China in the MSI high cancer indication. Briefly, we worked pretty quickly to move this trial forward into a pivotal study by meeting with the FDA on May 8th, agreeing on the trial design. I can talk about that later if time permits. We then filed the IND with the FDA in July. It was cleared 30 days later in August. And we've just opened the initial sites and expect to dose many patients this year, have interim data next year, final data 22, file for approval and market the drug in 2023. The reason that companies from China, I think, find TRACON's model of drug development attractive is that the alternatives, I think, are not ideal for the Chinese company. If a Chinese company wants to access the US pharmaceutical market, they really have 2 choices. They can try to run the trials through a US CRO from China or employ a small shadow team in the US to try to oversee the CRO. It's very hard to do. Most likely, a lot of Chinese companies will license the drug to Big Pharma, give away the drug, and just get a small royalty on the back end. And that royalty is probably only going to be about 10 to 15%. So in a sense, they've given away the majority of the value of the product to Big Pharma, in return for which Big Pharma does the trials and markets the drug. We felt it's better to offer Chinese company a solution that's much better in terms of the economics on the back end. So the way we do our deals with Chinese companies is we take on the risk of the clinical trial, we pay for the clinical trial, we commercialize the drug, and we split the profits with our partner. Now, profit margin in pharmaceutical business might be about 80%. So if you're splitting the profits with your partner, their equivalent royalty is about 40%, not 10 to 15, 40. So if a company believes in their asset, wants to access a large fraction of the value in the US market, we feel Tracon is the ideal partner for that company. And that's what we call our Tracon product development platform. We align with our partner, we share the cost, the risk, the profits. The program remains prioritized because we don't have a huge portfolio like Big Pharma. We only engage in partnerships where we really want to move that drug forward quickly. In our partnerships, we lead all the US and EU clinical trials and regulatory development. We generally pay for the trials, and then we will lead the commercialization of the drug. So really, once we get the drug, we do everything needed to approve it, commercialize it, and then we just issue a check for half the profits to our partner. And we look for drugs that are first in class or best in class, and then we provide the dossier that we expect to file with the US FDA to our partner. They can use that anywhere in the world, including in their home country, for approval there. So that's what we call our aligned product development solution. It's a risk, cost, profit share model, allows our partners to participate in a lion's share of the profits, allows them to use the BLA or NDA in their home country for further approvals. And we've been able to use this model to do partnerships with many companies. The most important partnership is the one with AlphaMab Oncology and 3D Medicines. We've also done partnerships with Johnson & Johnson, IMAB, another Chinese company. In fact, 2 deals with IMAB. So with that, I'll pause. And I know I covered a lot of ground. I thought I'd just give an overall perspective of how hard drug development is, what Tracon has done, and then kind of our model for drug development, which is a novel model designed to maximize the value of product candidates. I would welcome your questions.
Thank you, Charles. It's really a nice talk. Is there any questions?
Just going to, Charles, this is Raj. I was going to ask, so you don't use any CROs for your clinical trials. You do those trials on your own. And do you use a platform to do that? I mean, how do you conduct those trials?
Yeah, Raj, I'm glad you asked that question. That's really the value proposition of Tracon is that we have the CRO independent platform. So we have a team that came from Pfizer that understands how to implement trials themselves. So we have a data management system that's a proprietary system that other CROs may use. We have our own SOPs, our own study managers, and our own contract monitoring force that will monitor the data at the site. So it's everything you would get if you went to a CRO. But the difference, Raj, is that the incentive is so different. So when you go to a CRO, they will make money every time they issue a query. If the trial is delayed, they still make money because you pay them a monthly project management fee. Plus, they're looking to make a profit off the business with you. Plus, if you're smart, you'll have your own internal team you have to pay just to police the CRO to make sure they're doing their work. So you really double pay. You pay your own team to watch a CRO who you pay, who's incentivized to, in a sense, if the trial takes forever, it doesn't matter, they're still going to get paid. When you do it in-house, you're just, if you will, burning your own money. So you have every incentive to do the trial quickly, and you have every incentive to do it of high quality because you're only going to make money once the drug's approved. So the trial has to have great data. You want to do it quickly, and you want to do it at low cost. So everything's incentivized for us to do it, if you will, in the best fashion possible. Whereas with a CRO, it's not really the same aligned incentive. And then the other thing is we're not double paying. We're paying our people to do the trial. We're not paying our people to then watch a CRO who are then paying to do the trial. The result is dramatic. We do trials at less than half the cost of a typical CRO. As an example, the envafolimab phase 3 study, we expect to fully approve or generate data necessary for the approval of that drug for just $15 million. I can tell you from past experience at Pfizer, we would be paying over $100 million to do phase 3 studies. So it's a dramatic economy of scale. And it's the key. It's the key to our business development platform. That's why companies want to work with us, to access our ability to take their drug forward quickly, and to de-risk it because we're taking all that risk, and then also to do it at low cost if we end up sharing the cost of the trial.
Charles,
Go ahead.
Charles, I wanted to ask, looking at the timescale and the cost curves involved, and you have to make a decision at such an early stage whether this drug or this thesis of a drug is going to work. How do you decide? What criteria, what methodology do you use to decide that this little inkling of an idea is going to be a success in the future?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the preclinical development, you know, there are lots of criteria. You know, once you get in the clinic, you know, it's hard. You know, I always think there's a good, so you've got a drug, you know, in phase 1, you're really, if it fails you want to fail fast if you're going to fail. You know, you'll limit your expenditure. So, you know, in phase 1, if there's any significant safety signal, you know, that's probably a key criteria that, you know, stop and go somewhere else. But most drugs make it through phase 1. There's not a show-stopping safety signal. So the biggest failure point is phase 2. And, you know, you want to get to phase 2 as quickly as you can and get through phase 2 as quickly as you can, because that's when most likely you'll discontinue your drug if it's not going to work. And, you know, I think what you want to first do is show, you know, you're on target. So in phase 1, even, you need to show you're on target, that you have a pharmacodynamic effect. And that's probably the most important thing, even coming out of phase 1. In phase 2, you want to show some evidence of clinical benefit. You know, that it's not just that you're on target, that being on target actually means something to the patient. So typically in our indication, oncology, you need to see frank responses. You want to see responses as a single agent. And if you're seeing responses as a single agent, because typically those will be very refractory patients, that's encouraging. That would then lead you to take it into phase 3. So I would say phase 1, safe, target engagement. Phase 2, clear evidence of activity. As you move into phase 3, you really want to design your trial very carefully to pick a comparator, a standard of care that probably is the approved standard of care, but the least active standard of care, to give yourself the best chance of winning in that trial. And then the final key thing is reimbursement. Is you know, when you start your drug development, think about where you're going to be at the end. Think about the target product profile. What do you think that drug was going to look like at the end? And then, you know, say, is that something that physicians will use? And is that something that payers will reimburse? So, you know, those are all critical items, with phase 2 probably being the most highest risk, where you'll say, you know what, the drug isn't worth pursuing any further in clinical trials.
Charles, this is Nitin. And first of all, thank you for being our mentor and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Glad to connect with another reformed surgeon. I was an orthopedic surgeon in India. And I see from oncology surgery, you've gone to this innovative career pathway. With COVID, obviously, it's impacting clinical trials in multiple ways. And there has been last 2 years, me and Raj have been watching the whole decentralized or virtual clinical trial space very carefully. It seems like FDA and approval on protocols is somewhat lagging, but I think it'll come. What are you seeing in the last 6 months? And I won't take much of your time. I know we need to move on. But are you seeing anything very dramatic shift in terms of regulatory requirements and virtual clinical trials?
Yeah, great question. You know, we did a lot of work with the FDA this year, and unfortunately, we didn't see a major impact with COVID in terms of FDA interactions. You know, they were very good at, you know, meeting the regulatory required guidelines. For example, we submitted our protocol on July 15th, the pivotal study. You know, by regulation, 30 days later, we should have an answer, and they delivered, you know, within 30 days. The biggest effect we're seeing is at the site level. What we're seeing when we open sites for our trial, for example, we have a lot of experience with these sites. We know them really well, and we have a typical timeline whereby we open them. But what we're finding out is, even though our protocols, you know, we consider very important, we're treating a unmet need in cancer patients, every protocol goes to the bottom of the list in terms of the COVID studies go first, whether it's to the budget office, the contract office, especially, you know, the top of the pile is always the COVID-related protocol. So we've seen a little bit of effect there with with study startup. Interestingly, you know, our drug envafolimab is so unique in that it can be given subcutaneously, so we could dose patients at home. Despite that, every center says it's actually better to dose it in our clinic. So right now, the centers are working well, and they want to treat their patients in the clinic as they always have, as opposed to dosing at home. But if, for instance, a site were to totally shut down, we could, for instance, this particular drug, dose it at home because it is so easy to give subcutaneously.
There's a question from the chat box. I mean, it's actually my question as well. It's a little bit followed Tan's question. So basically, you're collaborating with a different company overseas for their products. You know, you pay the clinical trial for them. You just share the risks. In that case, how do you do the due diligence to make sure it's a potential, I mean, drug in the future for a success? Yeah. How do you do that?
No, it's a great question. You know, it's critical to the evaluation of any product we license. You know, for instance, envafolimab, you know, was a drug. Fortunately, they had a lot of clinical data behind it. So our partners had dosed, you know, 700 patients, so we could evaluate the safety and efficacy profile of the drug quite carefully under confidentiality to make sure it had the profile we thought would be making an effective drug in sarcoma. Yeah, it's probably a little harder once you go earlier stage. So when it's preclinical, like any preclinical asset, you know, there's much more risk there. You know, envafolimab was a different asset. It was already through phase 2 testing, so it had been de-risked. If you think about the profile of risk, whereby phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, it was already in a de-risked position. But when you're preclinical, those are very risky assets. You know, I think it's important to carefully review the data and really get into the raw data, make sure the studies that have been done, you know, represent exactly what you think they represent. It's a big part of the diligence process. You know, the intellectual property is another important part of the diligence process. You need to make sure that the patents have been filed, that there is true freedom to operate, so that you don't buy a product and realize that, oh, by the way, it's already infringing on an existing patent, and the tragedy would be you fully develop a drug and then you get sued for infringement and realize you did all this work for nothing. So patent infringement is a real key part of it. I think manufacturing is another really important part of it. So if the drug's moving into the clinic, you know, is it made at the quality you expect, and is that manufacturing process scalable? You know, if it's preclinical, they may have made just small quantities just to get through the animal testing, but you've got to now say, is that going to be a scalable process that you can manufacture what you expect to be a commercial drug? So those are all key elements of the diligence process.
Thanks, Charles. I think there are a lot of questions, but we are running out of time. If you have any questions, just send to the chat box, and then we'll connect with Charles later. Okay. So tonight we're going to have two companies, two early stage startups to pitch for us. The first company tonight is going to be SIGANEX. SIGANEX is trying to enable precision health intervention for everyone through the accessible NGS-based molecular diagnosis. They were founded last year and are doing a great job on putting things together. Tan, the CEO of SIGANEX, is going to talk about it. Tan, you there?
Yes, hi.
I'll
just share my screen with you guys. Can you enable it? Screen share.
You're good to go.
Okay, where is it gone? Hang on, just 1 second. Where is it? I can't see it on here, hang on. It's not showing up. Sorry, I don't know. Let me just start again. Okay, here. Sorry, now. So in one of the graphs that Charles showed was a drug Herceptin, which is used for breast cancer. And in the graph that Charles showed, it showed that if the drug was given when the biomarkers were present, it proved to be more effective. So we think that clinical genetics or companion diagnostics should be available for everyone everywhere. but there are various issues. Genetic tests are increasingly used for medical diagnosis. It's a very large and growing market. Our mission is to make clinical genetic testing accessible to everyone, everywhere. Currently, something like 20 countries in the world have any national capabilities to carry out genetic tests of any kind. In India, for example, there are 20 private labs that offer tests. Majority of public hospitals are not able to
do that. They have this high-end, high cost.
Sorry, can you mute yourself?
So our thesis is that clinical genetic testing is going to be increasingly used, and instead of focusing on whole genome sequencing, it's going to be very targeted at the point of need. Currently, the clinical genetic testing is used for non-invasive prenatal testing I think within the first trimester. If at the time of conception, certain inherited diseases can be identified in the fetus, particular therapies can be applied to help the growth of the baby as well as the mother. We all know that predictive genetics, where a whole genome sequence is analyzed and then compared against public and private databases to predict the chance of somebody getting a particular disease, as well as newborn screening, where you may have seen babies who get a prick on the heel, where they are tested for certain mutations. In the UK, every baby is tested for the PKU gene, see if there's a mutation. What it means is that if the baby can be assessed at a very early age, then the baby is put on a fruit diet instead of a fatty acid diet. And that would enable the baby to grow very relatively healthily. The problem is that clinical genetic testing is a very costly and very extensive process-driven business. There's lots of many steps and there's lots of errors. For example, in the US, majority of the errors are to do with clinicians ordering incorrect tests. And then you have shipping and handling errors where there's mislabeling, the correct buffers or reagents are added to the sample. By the time the sample reaches the lab, it's not usable. Then you have where the sample is transferred from the original container to a bullet, which can be used in an automated or a manual process, and there's contamination and errors happen there as well. In the UK, during this COVID trial, the UK government spent approximately £13 billion, which is about $19 billion, and setting up these gigantic molecular diagnostic testing centers. And in the initial phase, 40% of the samples were not usable simply because the barcode readers could not read the label that was stuck on these little sample collections. The label was illegible to be read by these barcode scanners. So as a result, 40% of the samples got thrown away and not used. Then you have very expensive equipment, which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to extract the DNA, to check the quality of the DNA, and then relevant target fluorescent markers are added, which allow sequencing machines to be able to read the particular genes of interest. And then this data is offloaded to incredibly large data farms with huge fridge-sized servers that basically crunch the sequence data and are able to produce a report. And in the UK and in the US, any clinical genetic test has to be reviewed by at least one or two independent people before a test report can be given. My wife had developed breast cancer about 2 years ago. And during that time, she was asked to submit a sample. Her clinician submitted a sample and said before they wanted to start the treatment, they would send the sample off to a lab in the US. From sending the sample for the results to come back took approximately four weeks. And the actual test was to determine which drug would actually work for this particular cancer, breast cancer. And in the end, she turned out to be triple negative, and they applied a different regime than Herceptin. What we have done is that we built and we designed a system which simplifies the entire process. So from a much more simplified, intuitive ordering process, a secure sample collection device, as well as a metadata collection. By that, we mean the phenotype of data, whether the person smokes, their age, what diet they have. And there's an opportunity for us to work with our sister company who's going to present today that have an app that collects this data already from a number of patients in Africa and other centers. Our system is entirely automated. So basically, once the device that we use to collect the sample is inserted as a cartridge, a local phlebotomist or a district nurse is able to understand what is the next cartridge he needs to load, which is based on the type of test that is being run. That data is then sent off to a cloud-based system, which then matches with the genetic mutation or the SNP against existing studies and research, which shows that this person's profile with this mutation, these are therapies that worked. So we mine that and we attach the references. We then forward that to an expert review network, independent accredited investigators and researchers and clinicians who are able to assess the report that our machine learning-based system has generated and is able to actually comment and annotate on the report. So from beginning to end, for most tests, we can deliver the results within a few hours, in some more complex cases within 1 or 2 days, compared to anything from 4 days to 3 months. Our system incorporates everything that is required to run a lab in a single container. One of the things that a lot of people may not know, but certainly Charles and some of our esteemed colleagues will know, is that when you create a genetic testing lab, you cannot do a lot of the process in the same room. For example, extraction of DNA has to be done in a separate area. Amplification has to be done in a separate area. Sample construction has to be done in a separate area. And sequencing has to be done in a separate area. So if somebody wanted to build a genetic testing lab in a small town in the middle of Africa or even middle of some of the states in the US, we're looking at $10 million plus to set up a fully functioning clinical grade genetic testing lab. What we have done is we've built designed a completely sealed closed loop system where there's no possibility of contamination. Everything that is required and is controlled and compartmentalized within a single unit that can fit on a desktop. One of the ways that we intend to leverage on what we're building is that because we use existing models of sequences and existing processes in a novel way, we can actually adapt existing assays. I think something like 60 IVDs on biomarkers already approved by the FDA, but the list is probably going to extend to something like 6,000 over the next decade or so. So one of the things we want to do and how we can actually increase our network and leverage our almost like an Apple App Store ecosystem is to actually provide the tools to researchers and existing assay developers to adapt their assays that can work on our system. Our model is to provide as a service where hospitals and medical centers can offer tests to be able to diagnose a certain condition. If it's a particular condition that may have a genetic cause, that can be quickly assessed and then the appropriate therapy applied. So our model is to provide our complete service, including the lab, as well as the consumables and the analytics and the second review service as a sample to result service, rather than selling somebody a machine and then letting them do everything else. We're particularly targeting areas such as non-invasive prenatal testing, infectious disease, pathogen de novo identification, newborn screening, oncology, and biomarkers, because these areas require fast response. People can't wait months for results to be given. Whereas if you're looking at something like predictive genetics, where the whole genome is sequenced, and people like 23andMe who do genotyping, use statistical models to assess what disease you may get 10 or 20 years later. There's no need for that type of test to be provided within a short space of time. But in case of non-invasive prenatal testing, you need the answer very quickly, because as the mother is developing and as the fetus is developing, you can't wait months to get the information. And in case of infectious diseases, it could be a matter of life or death. You need to know what is the infection that is causing that disease for a particular patient very quickly, so the appropriate therapy can be applied. So we're not competing with the big 23andMe and many other companies. We're looking at cases where a fast response is required. From a sample to answer is required very quickly, so the clinician can make a decision very quickly. In terms of a competitive landscape, there are quite a lot of players in this space, but we feel there's not a single company that provides a complete solution which can be delivered at the point of need. The Illumina currently is going after very large centralized medical labs. Also, they do provide a lot of sequences to research centers. And then at the other end, you have companies who are looking at PCR, which are very good at very specific small number of genes. But once you go past maybe 6 genes, you need NGS. Currently, there's no one that is providing a complete automated system for NGS. Who are our customers? Currently, from the research we've conducted, there are about 164,000 hospitals around the world, both public and private. In our target countries, we're looking at mostly large, developing, high-growth countries where there's a large population, high birth rate, and are fast-growing economically. In those countries, we've identified, through the help of the Economist Intelligence Unit, there are potentially 35,000 hospitals and medical centers which have the required number of cases every year that could benefit from having on-site testing. So we're looking at a number of pregnancies, how many breast cancer patients they have, how many prostate cancer patients they have, and so on and so on. Our target is to deliver 1,000 units by 2028. We think from the analysis we have done that each unit will do approximately between 5 and 10 tests per day. If we're successful at delivering and building our network and these establishments to do this number of tests, we can build a very profitable company within a very relatively short space of time. In terms of the market, I'm sure you don't need to see all this, but we all know that something like 17 million people get cancer each year. What I don't know is how many tests are done. So if you correlate that number and say if X number of people get breast cancer, how many people are tested to drive that number? So the number of tests is probably 10 times this, if not more than that. What I do know that in cases of infectious diseases, there are 360 million tests done every year to diagnose infectious disease cases. In terms of newborn screening and non-invasive prenatal testing, take a look at, for example, a country like India. India has about 26 million babies a year. Something like, I think 2 million babies have inherited or maternal genetic diseases. And I think less than 1 million are currently screened. Most people do not have the ability to do these tests or pay for these tests. So we think that providing a fast, accessible capability to hospitals and medical centers around the world, we can actually make a difference in the world. For us, the target market and how do we get to it is very defined. We already know who our customers are. We know how to reach them. We know how to communicate with them. And through a direct sales team and working with distributors as well as government agencies, we're able to reach directly to the customers that we want to target. Our model is we will not charge upfront for our platform. We will provide the platform and charge per test for a number of minimum tests per year. Based on that, we think we can build a very profitable company in a relatively short space of time. Where are we at the moment? We've actually, as Charles mentioned earlier, IP is very important. We went to Wilson Sonsini, we went to the life sciences team that specialized in molecular diagnostics, and the same team that looks after people like Illumina, Genentech, and many others are here, the ones who helped us prepare and file our patent. We filed a detailed filing on the 7th of October, and we think that we probably have about 100 individual component levels patents to file in the next couple of years to come. We've assembled a small team. Our chief scientist recently joined us, who's been working with us for some time. He's joined us. He was one of the senior scientists at Thermo Fisher looking at nucleic acid business. So he was, if you Google his name, you will see that he has a lot of patents and papers published after his name. We've also been, I have to say, slightly mercenary, and we've taken advantage of companies that have not been able to raise funding during the COVID crisis because they are not in COVID research or they haven't got the funding. So as a result, we've been able to obtain quite a few very highly qualified engineers, specifically in Bangalore, India, as well as Cambridge, UK, and some additional members that will join us in California. So this particular stage, we think we're going to accelerate this to much quicker. We anticipate we need approximately $4 million to get the device ready to be able to start testing in certain markets. Currently, Arnosh, my co-founder, and I own majority of the company. We've allocated sufficient for the team, and we're looking to raise $4 million of convertible with a standardized coupon in the industry, but we're open to other methods of funding as well. Myself, I've been a 3 times founder. This is my 3rd company. One of my companies is still running out of Oakland, which is a distributed location-based services content company. My 2nd company was an ASIC, a signal processing chip, which we sold the IP to China Resources. And in the past approximately 10 years, I worked for a number of companies, especially Chinese companies, to enter in the Middle East, South Asia, and East African markets. Arnosh, who's based currently in Mumbai and looking to return back to the US as soon as the restrictions are lifted, has developed 2 previous devices and has extensive experience of building software systems as well as platforms. He is the individual who has designed most of our platform that we're building. Dr. Xiaomin Chen he's our chief scientist with more than 30 years experience at Thermo Fisher. He has experience in building NGS sample preparation platforms for Thermo Fisher. Dr. Anne Tarubo, she teaches at Wolfson College at Cambridge. She's a geneticist, but also a microbiologist with a passion for aiding and providing services to the developing countries. We also have an ex-Illumina chap who's head of our bioinformatics. And as I mentioned, we've recruited recently 3 microfluidic engineers, all postdocs, one with experience at Weizmann Institute. And we're looking to recruit additional from Stanford and some of the people who have been made redundant, who have lost their jobs within the Bay Area, and some members who want to join us because they know and they like what we want to do. Why should investors invest in this? We're targeting a very large market. Our solutions lowers CapEx for a genetic testing lab by more than 10x. It lowers OpEx cost by more than 10x. Our lab can be operated by one person, doesn't need a team of technicians and experts to actually extract and then prepare a sample. It's all fully automated. It reduces deployment time. Our lab can be set up in any hospital within a matter of days. In fact, we think we can be set up in a single day. Reduces time to results by more than 10x. And because we use microfluidics rather than automated liquid handlers, the consumption of the reagents and the fluorescent markers which attach themselves to the genes of interest, our usage is up to 4,000% less than a similar system that deploys automated robotic handlers and manual systems. Our model is proven already. It's called the razor blade and the razor model, which helps us to bring long-term stability and scalability as well. We have clearly defined who the customers are. We know which customers are lacking the facilities. We know how many cases they have every year. So we can build a very efficient supply chain to be able to predict what consumables we need to produce to be able to serve particular customers. Our path for distribution is very clear. We already have interest from a number of governments as well as individual states, for example, in India and some of the other countries. And our team has a very verifiable, proven track record of both building startups, medical devices, and in genetics. That's it. Any questions?
Thanks, Dan, for your presentation. From the logo, it seems like Signex is a part of Google.
Cygenics. The reason why it's called Cygenics is because we have the actual microfluidics chips. We are actually embedding some silicon directly on the chips, which includes some of the sensors. So if you look at our logo, it's basically microfluidic cartridges based around a centralized system that processes them. In fact, the whole actual shape of our unit, which processes the chips, it's a disk-based system. So that's where our logo comes from as well.
Not from Chrome.
No, not at all.
Okay. Are there any questions?
Can I ask, so have you built many prototypes of the machine, or what's the status on the hardware design right now?
We're actually currently, we produce the individual components. Our system evolves around 3 proprietary design, microfluidic design to actually extract the DNA or DNA or RNA, and then to actually construct the sample to be sequenced. So that's where we are concentrating right now, because everything else is existing technology, which we're basically integrating and adapting. The sequencer, we're doing an OEM model through Illumina, which is one of their smaller sequencers. I think it costs something like $15,000, $20,000. So all that is totally automated. So a lot of the technology already exists. We're just adapting it. Where our innovation comes from, for example, in thermocycling, we have taken an idea from how ramjets cool air before air comes in, before it's combusted, because the air is channeled through specialized tubes using special alloys where it's instantly cooled by the time it hits the combustion chamber. So using a similar novel new method, we can actually do thermal recycling without too many moving parts and with low points of failure. And the actual microfluidic chips where the processing is done are completely sealed. So they do not, the sample does not touch air and it cannot leak. And even the sample that is used to collect the sputum or the blood, after the sample is collected, it's sealed. It cannot be tampered with. And when it's inserted into the device then instructs the operator which assay test chip to insert for that particular test.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
I have a question about the market access. How do you, I know you said you are not competing with 23andMe or BGI, those kind of enormous monopoly companies, but actually, how do you access the patient? I mean, the same problem with them is actually also exist. How do you compete with them, and how do you get the access of the patient from the hospitals, and how that works?
Well, we don't actually compete for the patients. What we do is we offer the hospitals, we approach a number of hospitals, quite large hospitals in many developing countries, and said, we provide you with a testing machine where you can actually do on-site tests, and you pay us per test. And based on our economic model, we know that we can beat the prices of BGI, and 23andMe doesn't really compete with us. It is like of Eurofins and many other large Biotech who offer a centralized model where the samples are shipped to them. They do the sequencing, and then the data is sent somewhere else to be analyzed. So we are not competing with any of them. Nobody's offering an integrated model where a baby can be screened very quickly on site. There's no one in the world that is doing this. That's why the folks at Wilson Sonsini were extremely impressed with us and helped us to build and prepare a very comprehensive patent, which we filed. And in terms of access to customers, 90% of the world doesn't have access to genetic tests. BGI, still, the machines are very expensive. Illumina machines, you can buy the machine, but then you have to set up the rest of the lab. That is quite expensive. Even places like Dubai, which is, I would say, is almost a first world country, most genetic tests samples are sent to places like Germany and the US to be sequenced, analyzed, and reports sent back. They have no capabilities. In India, there are only 20 labs serving a population of 1.4 billion. Then you look at places like Indonesia, even less. Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina. In Colombia, there's only one NGS lab in the whole of Colombia. The Colombian government changed the laws where their samples cannot be sent outside. In India, Mumbai doesn't let tissue samples to be sent outside of Mumbai area now. So there's going to be a lot of restrictions coming out where people want to protect the data of their citizens and not allow exploitation of genetic data. So we are not doing whole genome sequencing, which potentially can identify an individual. We're looking at specific targeted areas which are linked to diseases. So if the clinician thinks that if somebody has cholesterol and they're put on statins, there's no effect, or they are very slim like me, and they still, have issues with my cholesterol, then it might be familial cholesterol. So that requires a genetic test. This is the market which 23andMe and BGI are not going after. There are something like 60 biomarker tests already, IVD tests approved by the FDA, but I think, and we think, there's a potential list of 6,000 to come over the next decade.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your talk, Tan.
My pleasure.
Tonight, our last company going to present is HealthWith. HealthWith offers a mobile application that helps individuals aggregate their own health record from different sources, creating their own electronic medical record. Actually, it should be like that a long time ago. They also provide a digital token for users to trade their medical record. Sounds fancy. Nitin, the president of HealthWith, is going to talk about it. Nitin, are you there?
Yes, Raj is doing it. Raj is already sharing.
Raj is doing it? Okay.
And this is Raj Sharma. I'm the co-founder and CEO of HealthWith, and I'll be talking about our digital health platform for patient engagement. And I'm going to start with the problem that we have, which is that our medical records are really scattered all over the place. And there are a couple of factors that actually compound this problem, which is there is no interoperability among all these records, and there is no standardization, right? So, your records are in hospitals, clinics, labs, personal, wearables, your genomic data, your health insurance company has your health data, but there is no single place where you can go and get a longitudinal record of your health history. And the impact of this is that patients have very little control over their data. And so most of the patients are not engaged in their healthcare. And the other big impact is, Charles already outlined this, but it takes a lot of time. It costs a lot of money to conduct clinical trials. And there is a significant portion of that cost and time that's spent in collecting data of trial participants from different sources. And it is a real pain because, when pharmaceutical companies go to hospitals or to clinics to try and get those records, it's like pulling teeth. You obviously have to take patients' consent, but even when you have patients' consent, the hospitals are very, very reluctant to part with that data. And the same holds true for labs, clinics. Some of them have even, made businesses out of that. So this is a big problem. But there are three things that are happening, I call them mega trends, that are going to completely change this. And the first trend is government regulations and compliance. So the Department of Health and Human Services, because of 21st Century Cures Act, is now mandating that every health entity must share the data with patients, and patients have full access and right to the data. And they have not only specified, what kind of data has to be shared, but also the access mechanism and what standards should be followed. So the three trends are really, number one is government regulations. Number two is standards and the evolution of standards. And the third is technology. So if you look at some of the regulations that are coming out, what they're saying is that for every encounter that a patient has with a healthcare entity, they're supposed to share 16 data classes with the patient, right? And if they don't, talking and the fines are in millions of dollars. So hospitals, doctors' offices, labs, insurance companies are rushing to meet these deadlines that are coming up in 2021. So as it's, and these are very specific. So can you all hear me?
Yeah, your network's not very stable.
Yeah, we were getting a little bit of broken. So you may turn off your video, Raj. That may help.
Let's see. Yeah, I'll stop my video. Okay. And then go back to present. Yeah, so, you know, all these entities are rushing to meet these deadlines. And I think this is great news for patients and consumers because now finally they are going to be able to get control over their data. And in terms of technology, companies like HealthWiz and specifically HealthWiz, we have already developed this platform. It's a mobile platform, and we also have a back-end system to manage these mobile users. But essentially, it's a digital file cabinet that lets consumers and patients connect to all these different entities that I showed earlier, the hospitals, doctors' offices, access that data, download it directly onto their phone, and store it in the digital file cabinet. And so, as you can see on this menu, it could be a hospital, doctor's office, labs, and you know it could be data, and also it could be genetic data, as Tam was describing it. It could be data from your wearables as well as your information. But you have one place where you can store all this data, and you know we anticipate needing about 10 gig of memory on your mobile device to store it, and most mobile phones, smartphones have that today. We don't store pictures and images on the phone, but the patient can store those on their private clouds. And essentially, this becomes a property of the patient, and they can do whatever they want with it. So this is great, but that's only half the problem. So once a patient or a user aggregates all this information on their phone in that digital file cabinet, how do we engage with these patients? And the way we have our platform has been developed is that there are milestones that you can expose the patient to as part of a campaign. We call it a campaign, and I'll show you some examples of what those campaigns are. But one of the key examples is clinical trials. And so we take a clinical trial and essentially construct it as a series of milestones. And these milestones could be information or instruction milestones, but it could be a simple YouTube video that has instructions. It could be a video consent. It could be a request to upload the data from their wearables. It could be surveys. It could be PROs, patient-reported outcomes, medical record submission, file submission. And from the back-end system, you can design a clinical trial with these milestones, invite the patient to participate in this trial. The patient has a choice whether they want to participate in it or not. And if they decide to participate, then they have the choice of hitting these milestones. And optionally, if IRB allows, you can also reward these patients or participants with points. which they can redeem for Amazon gift card and other things. And all this happens as part of the workflow on this digital platform. And what this does is it just, once you have a mobile platform which patients and users can use, and in the back we have this web application, which is where you would essentially design campaigns and trials. When you have that, what it does is it just opens up a number of companies, including pharmaceutical companies, to do clinical trials, contract research organizations, CROs, insurance companies who might want to drive health campaigns. Same thing for employers who might want to drive health campaigns, can actually design these campaigns and invite participants to participate in those campaigns. And the use cases are also things like clinical trials, chronic disease management, and I'll show you a couple of examples, wellness programs, potentially COVID-19 risk management as well. And one of the key differentiators for us is that every exchange of value is recorded as a transaction on blockchain. So for example, let's say that you are asking participants in a clinical trial to share their data. The data is actually not put on blockchain, but the fact that the data was transferred and the provenance of that data is recorded on blockchain so that you can go back and verify that the data that the participant shared with you came from a specific hospital or a doctor's office, and it wasn't tampered with. So we can guarantee the authenticity of that data that the user is sharing as part of a clinical trial. And we also record things like if somebody received an award for hitting a milestone, a reward, then that data is also recorded on the blockchain. So again, no confidential information on blockchain, but the record of transactions and provenance is done on blockchain, and that helps with the integrity of the data that's being exchanged. Now, the potential of this is, again, because of the regulations and the standards, what it has done is it has opened up millions of people, possibility of millions of people participating in clinical trials and other health campaigns. So for example, 9 million veterans, from our platform could potentially, if they had our app, could go and download their complete medical histories on their phone. 100 million patients who are on Epic EHR can do the same thing because we connect with the Veterans Administration System. We connect with Epic. We also connect with insurance companies like Martins Point Health. Actually, they are an interesting company. They are an insurance company as well as a provider or a healthcare provider. So they have 100,000 members. And we can connect with them and download the members or the patients can download the medical records. We are connected with health information exchanges, and so 1.3 million members or patients can connect to those health information exchanges using our mobile device, and then download and access that information. Similarly, 53 million Medicare beneficiaries. So these are people who are over 65 mostly. And there is a program or a platform called Blue Button 2.0, and we connect to that. And so 53 million Americans could potentially get hold of their claims data and participate in clinical trials. Similarly, 9 million veterans. So VA Lighthouse is their platform. And that platform has both clinical data for veterans as well as claims data for veterans. And using our app, veterans can access both their claims data as well as clinical information. And I talked about Martin's Point as well. So, now you have the capability of, instead of going to hospitals and doctors' offices and getting data from them, you can go directly to participants, ask them to get their data from electronic health records or the claims data, or data from the wearables, and make them available as part of a clinical trial directly from their phones to our backend system, and then you can do your analysis and other things on the data that your participants are providing to you. So this is really unique in the sense that it's probably the first time where you have participants walking into a clinical trial armed with their clinical history and health data and claims data and making it available to you instead of you as a pharmaceutical company doing trials having to hunt for their data in different EHRs and different doctors' offices. So we believe we are uniquely positioned to engage participants remotely on their mobile devices. Why? Because we have this mechanism of incentivizing participants for remote engagement. So you can reward them with points, which they can redeem them for gift cards. There is tremendous amount of data integrity with blockchain and workflow creation on backend. It's a HIPAA compliant platform. The video interactions, telehealth, video consents, and adverse events are all built into the platform so they can be reported and extracted from the backend. And then, as I mentioned, participants engage with data aggregated on their mobile devices in clinical trials and other health campaigns. So that's what makes HealthWiz very unique. And in terms of examples, I'll just, there are 3 examples: real-world data collection for clinical trials. In fact, we are working with a large pharmaceutical company. They want to do real-world evidence, and so they're using. We are starting a trial with them, but they want to use the mobile devices and the backend platform to conduct these trials. Also, as we mentioned earlier, you can submit genomic data for precision medicine trials, or including wearables data as well. And it's a 3-step process. So clinical trials, step number 1 is they use the HealthWiz web application to recruit trial participants and with an invitation to participate in a screening survey. You can screen the participants, and then once they are eligible for this particular trial, you can then ask them to participate in your clinical trial, and then reward them for completing the milestones, the 6 different milestone types that we described earlier. Chronic disease management is another example of patient engagement, where, and we actually did this thing with a hospital in North Carolina, where we started this congestive heart failure disease management program. And this just shows how it looks in the back end with each of the patients who was participating in this program along with their vitals. And then the patient view shows how they were essentially sharing their information for chronic disease management with the hospital. And they were getting rewarded for their participation. So we think that the virtual trials, where people don't have to come to a site when they're participating in a trial, are going to be big. Participant recruitment is a huge problem in clinical trials. We think that if trials go remote and virtual, the participation can increase by 40%. We can shorten the length of trials by 50% and reduce the cost by 75%. Again, we don't think that everything is going to go virtual day 1, but the trend is definitely there. It's a huge market, $70 billion market in transition. And today, virtual trials are less than 1% of all trials, because that's how it was done traditionally. According to Gartner, by next year, end of next year, 40% of the top 100 life science companies will begin to implement digital trial pilot programs. Digital trial pilot programs are really virtual trials or some kind of a hybrid trial. But in 10 years, people believe that 100% of trials will be, some of them will be all virtual and some of them will be hybrid. So this is our key differentiators. We can easily move from hybrid trials to completely virtual trials. There is a flexible workflow engine in the back that people can design their clinical trials in a very flexible way. Integrated telehealth offerings so that you can do things like video consents, video conferences, all that is built into the platform. The study participants are incentivized to participate in clinical trials. There is end-to-end data integrity with blockchain. And our competitors do have big pieces of what HealthWiz has, but we are the only comprehensive solution, and we are a technology pure play. So we don't have, clinical staff that actually does the trial, but we have a SaaS platform in the cloud, software as a service platform, that we can make available to companies like Charles's companies to do clinical trials. Our projections for 2021 are, and I'll start with pricing. We think that the price range for doing some of these remote trials is going to be $3,000 to $5,000 per trial per month, in that range. And we think we can sign up 20 campaigns by the end of 2021 to hit a $1 million run rate. And again, this is all software as a service revenue. And I think in terms of, we already talked about Cygenics, but in general, the synergies with portfolio companies is anytime a company wants to do therapeutic clinical trial, and if they want to do remote clinical trials, we would be a really good fit. If there is a medical device that needs to be approved, with trials and so forth, then that, HealthWiz makes a good platform for that, because they can connect the device to the mobile phone and get data back into the trial management system in the back. And of course, remote patient engagement as well. Dr. Nitin Desai and I are co-founders. I have had a couple of exits with prior companies. I'm an investor, board member, entrepreneur. Some of my prior companies were 3C Logic, Nextstone, as well as Create IoT, which are more in the telecom space. I think Nitin has also an entrepreneurial bent. He's the chief medical officer of HealthWiz. He's a senior leadership position at Cape Fear Valley Hospital. And as he mentioned, he's a recovering orthopedic surgeon. These are some of our accomplishments. We have participated in a lot of different competitions and health-related challenges. And this is just a list of that.
Thank you, Raj. It's a nice presentation. Is there any questions? I have a question about the standardize of the data. You were trying to integrate different sources of the EMR to your cloud, maybe. But actually, the data source are actually a lot of different forms, ICD-9, ICD-10. We use the Epic and partner system, but how do you guys standardize all of this kind of data source to one platform?
Yeah, so that's what some of the new regulations are, that have been issued, that all these health entities, hospitals, that use Epic, Cerner, whatever the EHR is, they must make these data elements, these are 16 data classes, available using an API called FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And it defines exactly what the data format should be and what the API looks like. And if a patient has a mobile application of their choice, then these 16 data classes must be available to them for every encounter to the patient. So it's again, standard application programming interface for accessing patient data. It's very well defined. So whether you are a lab, whether you are a doctor's office, whether you are a hospital, this is how it is. The mandate is that they all have to implement this in 2021.
Okay. Any other questions? I actually know that Google had a program called Google Health. I'm sure nobody ever heard of it because it's failed in 2005. I happen to know the leader of the program, Aaron Braun. Actually, I asked him why it's failed. The reason is because the hospital is so focused on the confidentiality and stuff to refuse all of the requests, even from Google. Right now, the Watson from IBM, I mean the IMS, Truven, sometimes they have to use claims data. because the EMR is super difficult to get. Do you have any idea how you wanted to have enough data to support your program and products?
I think, Michael, the two things, 2 out of the 3 Raj mentioned. One is, if you can spend a few minutes looking up 21st Century Cures Act, how that ONC is imposing on a health services provider and FHIR, the interoperable data set standard and API, so that patients can access their medical records in electronic format by law, which is a standardized electronic format. I think those two key elements, FHIR and Cures Act. I think if you look up those two, you will get the whole zest of how 2021 is going to be different than 2005.
Michael, I think I got disconnected, but I think I heard you say something about Google trying it and failing, and then I heard something about IBM Watson. Was that the question you asked?
Yeah, my question is actually, this is a gray area. I mean, who owns the data? Of course, there's no question the data should be owned by the patient. But right now, a lot of the hospitals, they multiply all of the source of the data. And to deny all of the requests by different companies like Google and IBM, they actually try to give the access to the patient themselves, but they failed. So that was my question. How do you
so so in the US, what is going on is that out of all the 50 states, there is only one state, New Hampshire, that clearly says that the data belongs to the patient. In all other 49 states, the data ownership is all over the place. For some states, they say the hospital owns it. Some other states that say there is a joint ownership between the hospital and the patient. There's only one state, New Hampshire, that says it belongs to the patient. But here's the thing. What these new regulations are saying is, regardless of who owns the data, the patient has a right to access it. And once I, as a patient, access it and download it, I have a copy of it. After that, the ownership becomes mine. It's the data is in my custody, and I can do whatever I want with it. Now, if Google as a company tries to go and get that data, they won't share it with Google, which is what is happening to a lot of these pharmaceutical companies as well. They try and go and get this data from hospitals, and they get the runaround because the hospitals don't want to share data. But if a patient goes and says, I want my data, then by law, the hospital must make that data available to the patient. And once I have a copy of it, it's mine. I can do whatever I want with it. It's under my custody, and legally, I have the right to share it with whoever I want, however I want it.
Okay. Thanks for your talk, Raj. It's a terrific speech. Okay, everybody. So thanks a lot for coming. This is our second event, the end of the second event. So again, we are a very new organization. We're trying to help the new startups on precision medicine, biotech. So if you have any question, feel free to contact with us, or contact email is right in the chat box, and also to me is also fine if you have my contact. So welcome everybody to be here tonight. Thanks a lot for coming. Thanks, Charles, Tan, Raj, Nitin. I really appreciate it, and have a good night and a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.